on the quantitative part, he got 179 out of 180, and that was on the 95th percentile. 180 is 97th percentile. Okay. Those Chinese students, you give them a problem, they know how to solve it. You ask them to come up with a problem, nothing. Not because they're not smart, that has nothing to do with intelligence. The education system does not encourage asking questions. You know, in the People's Republic of China, you are required to perform a task, okay? You are part of a machine. So I tell you, integrate tangent of x squared from minus pi to pi. Okay, those guys, you know, can dance with that. But ask him, come up with the theory of something that explains these anomalies, nothing. I mean, you do have very good Chinese theoretical physicists, but you know, you have more theoretical physicists from Finland that has a population of 5 million compared to China that has a population of 1.4 billion. I'm sorry. That's not because Chinese people on average are not smarter. Despite having all that population, and typically PhD kind of people are tail of the tail, you don't get that many theoretical physicists because it's not encouraged. And you know, in my alma mater, if you thought you were going to get an A by simply knowing the answers, you ended up, you know, graduating with a 2.5 GPA, knowing all the answers. You just couldn't do it. If I actually applied that standard here, I don't think we would have had an MBA program anymore. I mean, I refused to teach in the MBA program, but early on I had to. I had two choices, either apply standards or eliminate the MBA program. So I used to ask the final exam of this class and use the same questions for the final exam of the MBA finance class. My undergrads did about 10 to 15 points on average better. Well, we're not Harvard, okay? We get a much better quality in undergraduate than in graduate. They also think they're entitled to an A, they're not. They get very pissed when you give them a B. Two C's make them fail the program anyway. I mean, I met people in the school that works in the administration. Despite my reduced standards, had they been my MBA students, they would not have it an MBA. But somebody said, okay, we have to graduate them. What are you going to do? You graduate them. All right, next question. It's a definition. I'm not going to worry about that. Depreciation increased the net fixed assets. All right. Now, let's think about this too. It is not terribly complicated, but it's a good habit to think about stuff. Oops, not that one. Now, net fixed assets equals fixed assets minus accumulated depreciation. So if depreciation goes up, net fixed assets are going to come down. So that is true. Inventory is qualified as a current asset. True or false, guys? True. I mean, we should be a little bit vocal about it. I mean, I see your head bobbing, but maybe there is somebody over there who doesn't see it. It's by definition. Also, inventory is something in most companies can be quickly converted into cash within a year. Obviously, if you're talking about Boeing 747, that may not be the case, but other than that, it's secure an asset. Okay, let's think about this. Also discuss the definition of cash flow from assets. Now, cash flow from assets is operating cash flow minus net capital spending minus change in net working capital, and operating cash flow is net income plus depreciation plus interest expense. Or you can think of this as earnings before interest and taxes plus depreciation times tax rate or EBITDA. In a question like this, you need to think about pretty much everything being constant, okay? Depreciation by itself doesn't change the net capital spending. Net capital spending is how much money you spend on new capital goods like property, equipment, less anything you sell of them. But operating cash flow does depend on depreciation. Everything else being the same, an increase in depreciation increases operating cash flow because through its effect on taxes. In fact, depreciation times tax rate is known as depreciation tax shield. That's how much you can reduce your depreciation. So an increase, let's go back to this one. An increase in depreciation will increase operating cash flow, which will increase cash flow from assets. Again, that's definition. I'm not going to spend time on it. This is also definition, but let me see. This is something you should know from your basic accounting classes. Is that a true or false question? GAAP is short for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. Is that true or false? Why not? Just because it's true, just because it's false doesn't mean anything to me. You gotta tell me why you think it's false, or why do you think it's true. GAAP is used to recognize revenues and expenses. Okay? We have method of depreciating fixed assets. We have, among other things, straight line depreciation, sometimes depletion. If you're using, for example, a truck with a certain usable miles on it, or the so-called makers modified accelerated cost recovery system. But GAAP is not one of them. By the way, there is a well-known pattern, at least in Western countries. The success rate among questions where the correct answer is true is a lot higher compared to true-false questions where the correct answer is false. It is actually known as acquiescence bias. Among other explanations, we're nice people. In the absence of evidence to the contrary, we'd like to say yes. That actually comes up a lot in social surveys. So you actually need to make corrections, or you write your questions in certain ways that acquiescence bias doesn't play a role. Sometimes you ask the same question in two different ways to see if they're consistent. Typically in exams, the difference is 10 to 15 points. I actually did some research on that and published it in Top Education Journal. I use the help of the what I call fuzzy exams, confidence-based. Because another possible reason why there's a difference, it's not that difficult to recognize a statement that's true. You just know it. Sometimes it's a definition. But in order to say that something is false, you have to come up with a reason why it should be false. There's a hypothesis called cognitive fatigue hypothesis, or cognitive fatigue syndrome. Students with higher cognitive skills are able to think of 4, 5, 6 different things. Okay, that's not the reason, that's not the reason, that's not the reason, hence it must be correct. Students with lower cognitive skills, they think of 1 or 2 maybe. Oh, I can't find the reason, hence it must be correct. You know, a lot of people say, if I don't know how to do it, aliens must have done it. You see this argument a lot. You know, I can't figure out how they did those pyramids, it must be the aliens. You know, what is your level of sophistication in 3-dimensional geometry and physics? I don't know. I mean, I can't figure it out either, but, you know, as I said, I hated my physics teacher, especially the basic mechanics, all the pulleys and stuff. I hated that. I mean, I understand relativity better than all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that, you know, aliens have done it. That means I have lower cognitive skills when it comes to physics of that sort. You don't know which one is responsible, or to what extent acquiescence bias and cognitive fatigue are responsible.